This week's episode is a discussion of a reworking of Kindred of the East and how that can interface with Mage. The work was wonderful, so I made an episode out of it talking with the author. We do talk about demons and the torments of hell, so if physical violence and brief mentions of harm are not your cup of tea, I totally understand if you want to skip this one. Link to the book is in the show notes. It is pay what you want. If it turns out that you like it, you can buy another copy if you're a little skeptical at first. I mentioned previously also that we'd be taking 2 weeks off for the holidays, and as always, I'm terrible at taking breaks. So we'll be doing a Reality Deviant Book Club episode next week, then a year-end wrap-up the week after that, and then on into 2024. And with that, on with the show. Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast. And joining me today is a Storyteller Vault creator and author who has done a delightful work in terms of both its scale and breadth. Joining me today is Hsien, the author of Kindred of the East, the Relentless Age. This is a text that's available on the Storyteller Vault, kindly available at Pay What You Want, and it is kind of a reimagining or celebration of Kindred of the East. And as longtime listeners know, I refuse to talk about Vampire the Masquerade, and since this is not that, I can talk about The Hungry Dead. Hsien, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. So, am I allowed to talk about Vampire the Masquerade?
You're more than welcome to. There's just kind of a running joke I have that I'm just never going to talk to someone about mage vampire crossover. I have
Fair.
gone everything that is close to it. If someone wants to talk to me about the Libon, the Drowned Legacies, all for it. So when I saw something that was not vampire but kind of had the Hungry Day, I'm like, hotcha! Let's give it a go. Hsien, this clocks in at 196 pages. It is wonderfully illustrated. It is well edited. I spent about 6 hours today just kind of going through it and frantically underlining and noting things. And this isn't the first go. What led you to do this?
It's funny you say it's wonderfully edited because I looked through it just today and then I saw a typo and I thought, oh gosh, but hopefully no one will find it. So, as far as what led me to do this, I suppose it's because I saw something really, really good in Kindred of the East. And I feel that a lot of people did as well. But it's admittedly buried under 25 years now of things that were not so good in hindsight. But it's rather like polishing a stone. It's not like the thing itself lacked any value. And I felt, especially when I started doing some revisions, there were some earlier versions that I did on the Storyteller's Vault, which I don't recommend other than for academic purposes. But they were sort of in response to this sentiment that I saw that Kindred of the East was entirely a waste of time and that it would be better kind of scoured from the earth. And I don't think that that's true. I think that there's something really beautiful here. I think especially for 1998, it was something that had never been seen before, never been done before. And for someone of Asian descent like myself, and I'm sure other readers too, there was something kind of complicated about seeing yourself, seeing like these guys are supposed to be cool, and they absolutely were. And then seeing a bunch of other stuff that's like, well, I wouldn't have done it like that. So I'd say that all kind of coalesced, and I've been working on this for a few years, and then you have the culmination with you on your desktop, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I certainly do. And you talk about that other product, and originally Kindred of the East did have tight, dense background and lore. It kind of fed into the exalted as prehistory of the
Yes.
world of darkness in a very particular way, which was kind of interesting and enticing. And for all the faults of the Kindred of the East, whenever I talk to the authors, they at least say, we tried and we were super excited. And those come across for,
Yes.
for all its failings. The energy and excitement and appreciation are certainly there. So what do you play as a Kindred of the East? We've heard terms of the Hsien, the Kuei, a whole bunch of terms. What do you call the thing you are in this?
Well, for the purposes of the Relentless Age, you are the Hungry Dead. I suppose you can break that down, right? So the Hungry Dead, they're dead. They're like revenants from legend. I mean, not revenants in Vampire the Masquerade, but demons that have inhabited corpses and have risen, such as the Betal, in Indian mythology, or the Jiangshi in Chinese films. These are people, formerly people, who have escaped from hell. They have retaken their corpses and now they walk the earth, but they're hungry. And so they feed on flesh, blood, Later on, they can possibly feed on breath, even the world itself, but they're always going to be parasites. And I guess even when you say the hungry dead, you say the hungry dead. And I think that it's important to remember that these characters have created a cohesive society for themselves. And as we'll get into a little bit later, it's kind of based on the pursuit of enlightenment as well as a reckoning with the fact that they are very much demons.
And you make the term escaped from hell. So, one of the things that is kind of interesting about this variant is every character in this has somehow exited the thousand hells.
Yes.
And one of the things that you do that I, as a mage player, appreciate is you outline what some of those hells could be. And if you're using this in a mage game, these could be afterworlds. These could be astral locations. These could be underworld locations if you want to place it in the far shores. Because again, once it hits your table, we don't get to tell you what to do. But
Mm-hmm.
you also indicate, for instance, here are the ways that souls can escape. In this one particular area, there is a beast that is going around. And if you're consumed by the pale beast, you might be able to get back. Periodically, there is a bit of hair that seemingly is coming from the sky that you may be able to climb. In this one particular oceanic hell, most people are continually going for the surface trying to seek air and breath. But actually, if you go deeper, there is a one cave that will let you come back. And you have this particularly evocative line that says, something of you must remain, even if it's a single speck of ash. So your character starts having overcome some sort of terrible existence. Why have it start there? Like, what is their history in the world? Have they always existed, or was there a particular moment of genesis? Was there a first hungry dead, the first person to figure out that you could escape?
I do have to give the caveat that I can't take all the credit for those hells that were described. They were adapted from the book The Thousand Hells. I did add a few more, like as far as the details of how one may escape, I did add those in. But yeah, I mean that stuff is the brilliant work of the people who came before. But with regard to your question, it's interesting because there are a couple of dharmas, and I'll get into what dharmas are, that sort of say it doesn't matter what came before. What matters is now. What matters is the karma that dragged you down to hell. And one thing that some might find interesting, either interesting or alien, about the Kindred of the East experience is that these people who went to hell and then they tore themselves from the karmic wheel of reincarnation by escaping. So they have no home anymore. But what brought them to hell in the first place isn't necessarily fair. It's not a Judeo-Christian sort of like, you did bad thing. You could have done bad things, yes, but it could be you were tortured to death. You were abused your entire life. You were chained to a basement like a feral animal. Things that are grossly unfair. You died of a terrible disease. And that suffering is a form of karma and it can weigh you down and it can send you to hell. And there's this thought of like, is the universe a fair place or is something wrong? Is something broken? So in the book, I write that the dharmas sort of disagree. So, and I'll go into more details about what each dharma is and how they function, but there are these religious slash philosophical groups that each posit an answer to what they're supposed to be doing with their time here in the mortal world. And a few of them, they're sort of Chinese based. I've called them the petals of virtue because they're very closely aligned with each other. They posit that once upon a time, in an age of legends that is long gone, they were kind of the version 1.0 of the glorious heavenly immortals that we get in mythology. If any of your listeners are Chinese or have an interest in Chinese mythology, they're probably familiar with the eight immortals, who are all, virtuous, good, wondrous people who obtained immortality through spiritual cultivation. So there is a pervasive myth, at least in the Chinese side of things, that once upon a time there were these people who were these wonderful, virtuous immortals called the 10,000 Immortals in the original version of Kindred of the East. And eventually they became corrupt and they committed terrible sins, of which the worst supposedly was killing, possibly eating their own children. And so they were punished. And I don't know if you know the gentleman Holden Shearer. He used to be the Exalted developer.
I am familiar with Holden's work.
I admire a lot of what he's done. He once, I think, in kind of an unofficial capacity, theorized that the original immortals, the 10,000 immortals, could not be destroyed They were built into the world, so they could only be modified. So what God, or the august personage of Jade, or the Jade Emperor, whatever you want to call him, the supreme power, modified how immortals are made into a curse, so that what were once the most virtuous and studious and cultivated people are now the worst, the most base, criminals, rapists, murderers, and, like I said, people who just got an extremely raw deal. All those cursed folks are the ones who rise from then on. I don't write that as an objective truth. It's not exactly Cain, but it is one. It is a major one.
The setting you outline has no necessary arrows towards there being any sort of metaphysical truth to kind of any way to cut this, except for some of the basics. Like Vampire diegetically talks about people's generation and their removal and the thinning of the blood. There really isn't an analog here to be concerned about, so you don't have to deal with those same arrows. It is also the case that the collection you had, as you mentioned, it spreads outside of not just East Asian originating faiths. You talk about Islam in the East, you talk about Tengrism as well, and how that may manifest. To you, who winds up in the thousand hells? Is that a function of where you die? Is that a function of what you believe? Is it something else, or do you just kind of shrug your shoulders? Or alternatively, do you have any recommendations for those of us who don't necessarily want to move a chronicle or run a game within 1,000 miles of the Ring of Fire?
Of course, of course. This is for those of your listeners who are in the know about the original run of Kindred of the East. This was always a question, right? Do only Chinese people go to this particular hell? Why are these special vampires only arising in Asia, right? Sometimes in India. So, by the way, I know people get 1,000 and 10,000 all mixed up. I mean, those are like very common, I'd say, East Asian descriptors, like 1,000, 10,000, million. It just means a lot. But as far as who can go, theoretically, anyone. The reason that these particular hells, the ones that I describe in the book, are the ones where most people arise from, is because there's stuff going on behind the scenes in the setting of 1998 that some of the kings of hell, they're called the Yama Kings, they believe in a prophecy of the demon emperor, that basically when the age turns to a certain time in the history of the universe, that a demon emperor will rise and they will rule over everything. So there are these kings of hell who are jockeying to become the demon emperor of the prophecy. And so what that translates to, and as far as what their actions are, they're trying to get more influence in the mortal world. So far, how that's translated is they're very successful in the half of the world where Asia is. They are becoming more successful elsewhere. And as the years go by, and as the what's called the Age of Sorrows approaches, the idea is that they will one of them or more of them will potentially have influence all over the world. So as far as who can go, right, the Hungry Dead are global phenomenon. That's a little bit different from the way it was originally. But in this book, in the Relentless Age, they are global. The reason that the Hungry Dead exist in Asia as a society is for a lot of reasons. The alignment with the Chinese imperial bureaucracy, which has existed for thousands of years. The discovery of Dharma in itself, which makes them more stable than they would be elsewhere. Becoming more enlightened actually does help them, which we'll get into. The reasons that they exist in Asia, it's more that things have worked out in their favor there so far, but it doesn't mean that they can't arise elsewhere. And in fact, they do arise, especially in California.
And metaphysically, this kind of fits because one of the lines you also include is the Yama Kings don't care about souls. They've got enough of those. They got souls for days. But what they lack is influence, or that is what they're still trying to accumulate. And this gives us a lot of in for plots. Your characters do not need to be Hungry Dead, but they may have heard of a mortal cult that is trying to usher in the age of the Demon King, or you may have an opposing group that says this is inevitable, but the more righteous and just we can make the world, the shorter that age of depravity and badness is going to be. You have a character that dies under strange circumstances, and one of these Yama Kings has done one of the characters, maybe in Stygia, if you want to use that Wraith canon, a favor, and suddenly it's like, okay, you need to shoo a little bit of this over, and you get someone who suddenly finds themselves in the hell of boiling acid or something like that, and returns and is like, what the dink? So you do give ins on why this can occur in other places. I also like the idea that the cosmos just kind of makes mistakes sometimes. That if you do want to posit a imperfect celestial bureaucracy or something like that, not everyone quite gets to the right place, or some favors have been shaved. But you do kind of break that tie between ethnicity, for instance, necessarily resulting in a different afterlife, and that just kind of opens up a bunch of space for play. And the Yama Kings are still there, and again, I think they are great entities for mages to know of in their existence. The Euthanatoi may care about what is this next stage of the cycle of creation. The Akashiana may have more direct concerns. The Celestial Chorus, or certain members of it, are going to be terribly curious what it means to escape from hell for some of them. Some of the more technomantic or materialist groups may be like, what is this other embodied entity that seems to be powered by not food and drink as we would normally know it? So there are a bunch of cases where this is going to kind of be curious. This doesn't require great amounts of meta plot. Unlike Demon or unlike Mummy, there isn't a sudden change that occurred, which leads me kind of to the question of why 1998?
To go a little bit outside of the work itself, it's because of the rules of Storyteller's Vault. They don't allow you to make like a core book by itself, but they allow you to make historical supplement. Unfortunately, probably for some of your listeners, 1998 is now a historical time.
I can feel my bones turning to ash. Thanks.
That was the year that Kindred of the East came out 25 years ago. So I thought, why not set it then? It's also probably the most exciting time for them as a species, because the Sixth Age is coming a year from then. The Week of Nightmares is going to happen, which, if your listeners don't know, that's when Ravnos eats all of his kin in India and causes havoc. I just thought it's an appropriate time, and it's an exciting time for games.
Yeah, the East Asian financial crisis hasn't occurred yet. Hong Kong is still under British
Oh, it
rule.
has. The financial crisis has happened. They haven't gotten out of it yet. So
That was
so things are
97, my
pretty
mistake.
bad.
Yeah. But yeah, as you mentioned, previously talked to the author of World of Darkness, Hong Kong, and they're like, they asked us to write a book a year before the handout was going to go. We didn't know it was going to happen. No one did. I just need a moment to recover from, in changeling terms, the banality trigger of 1998 being a historical supplement. Okay. Continuing forward, you make mention of the various dharmas that a Hungry Dead may be. What are the dharmas, and what does that mean to be a member of one?
Interesting you were mentioning the mage groups that could be interested in the Yama Kings and Thousand Hells in the Prophecy of the Demon Emperor, because I suppose for mage fans, the Euthanatoi, the Chakravanti, would probably lend a lot of understanding if you're a fan of them. I believe they believe in the cycle and reincarnation and sort of pushing things along. Is that correct?
Yeah, they believe in at least generally a cyclicality or something of a force of self-attunement to the universe. It doesn't necessarily, someone may draw from a different death tradition that doesn't necessarily have reincarnation, but kind of their unifying thing is we do the tasks that no one else will, that often are required for society to stay healthy. And frequently that takes on the form of the maintenance of the wheel. Some people view that wheel as being the cycle of reincarnation. Other people view it as kind of the cycle of energy through the cosmos. So there's a few different ways to take it, but yeah, that's certainly a big one.
As far as how mages and Hungry Dead would interact, I mean, we can get into it a little bit more later, but they would probably actually have formal relations, especially with the Akashayana, the Chakravanti, because they would be seen as other beings of Dharma. The Hungry Dead, I mentioned earlier that what makes them survive in Asia is that that's where Dharma was discovered and cultivated. Whether or not you believe that they were heavenly immortals who were cursed, or if you believe that they were always there, the Hungry Dead have a tough time. So that actually might answer another question of why are they predominantly in Asia? Because if you don't have the structures to support them, you are in for a very tough, short eternity.
Yeah. One of the things that is also a really good plot in is a recently emerged Hungry Dead needs to consume flesh unless they're in the position of immediately having some sort of mentor that can be like, no, this is how you do it. It takes a while for a hungry dead to figure it out. You also specifically mention in a few places that a hungry dead that is thought to be a vampire, unless they have exceptionally high humanity and can find a way to stay there, their nature is going to very quickly fade away until they kind of reach this humanity death spiral.
That's right.
Characters encountering essentially a zero dharma character with high suffering. You mentioned that there are these wonderful little systems that basically they radiate this hellish energy, and that's a way you can just have it come onto your scene. You're like, well, there's one.
Yes.
There's probably others.
So that might actually help the explanation of Dharma, because how much being a hungry dead kind of sucks. Oh yeah, that'll definitely make people want to play it. But so they come from hell. They have hell inside them in the form of suffering, which, as you said,
capital S suffering.
Capital S suffering.
Yep.
Yes, it is. If some of your listeners are familiar with Buddhist terminology, it's anicca. It's craving. It's just pain, and it radiates off of them. It interplays with some of how their powers work, which I'll get into later. But the more that they use their raw power, the more that the hell radiates off of them. The more cruelty they indulge in, the more it comes out of them, and things get really ugly really fast. So Dharma is a solution. It is the way out. Basically, you have these philosophies that posit that you are hungry dead, but there is another reason why you are here, why you escaped from hell, essentially tore yourself away from reincarnation so that you don't get another chance. If you die, it's it. So why are you here? If you follow the four petals of virtue, one of the four petals of virtue, which are, very Chinese centric, but they can be anywhere in Asia, they say, no. The point is that you are a heavenly immortal. You've been cursed because of, the mythology that they give about the original heavenly immortals and how they were cursed by God. But they say that the purpose of you being here is to redeem yourself and to become a true immortal, right? How do you do that? Well, that's where there's some disagreement. You align yourself with the underworld and you help the restless dead, or you try to become a devil, but perfect, a righteous God in a way. You try to bring the world in harmony with heaven to make the world perfect. That's how you could become an immortal. Or you try to align with life to become as alive as you can possibly be. These sorts of things. But at the end of the day, these philosophies believe that you do this and you will become a perfected immortal, and you will have earned your place back in the world. And there are other dharmas that disagree with that. They say, no, immortality is not the point. That essentially you are a human being, you are part of humanity, and you're supposed to rediscover it. It could mean trying to go back to your life, try to do it better, try to learn more. And as the centuries go on, you try to learn kind of the purpose of humanity itself. Or it could be that you try out different lives, you change your body, you change your mind. One lifetime, you're a librarian in Shenzhen. Another lifetime, you're a gangster in Tokyo. What do you learn from that? Can you become enlightened by finding the common thread of humanity in all these different lives that you can live? Those are some other examples of Dharma. In essence, these are philosophies that give them a way forward, and they give them an ultimate goal, which is enlightenment, however that may manifest.
And the important part here is they all work.
Yes.
Like there is, you don't make a canon claim like, oh, these are just pretenders, or these are just secretly still the hand puppets of the Yama Kings. You posit a Tengris where it's like, no, this could be the way you do it. And you have dharmas that are diametrically opposed to each other. And again, your character can still accumulate wisdom and power through that. Another thing that you do, importantly, is you say, I'm just calling it dharma for convenience's sake. Here's 10 other terms that someone in game may refer to it that reflect different culture understanding. Someone may ally this with something else. You do this also with chi as a concept, which I certainly appreciated, where it's like, oh, okay, I'm not actually familiar with it from these 7 cultures, but I've seen those 2 things before. I'm familiar with the subcontinent manifestation of these ideas, and okay, I'm seeing how these are all tying together. So we have another set of ends. Like one thing, they radiate this hellishness and this emotional pain. We get the idea of torment in Demon the Fallen, and I could also see a slowly activated group of hungry dead setting up in a community who aren't doing a great job of kind of containing that, and this starts spilling out, and suddenly we have a pagan practitioner who notices that animals in the area are being spooked, or the spirit wilds are off, because you also include ways for characters to interface with that. Another thing that's important is these characters will interface with what in Mage we would call Umbrood. That both the Hungry Dead, especially if they have some sort of East Asian background, may be very familiar with both spirits and Umbrood, mythical creatures that have kind of made their way back into the mundane world. Your characters could get caught in the machinations between these two opposing dharmas and suddenly find themselves that it's like, oh, this person who has clawed themselves out of hell and I have a very similar life is to be lived to the fullest, but he is literally a demon. And we are agreeing a lot. So again, yeah, we have a bunch of little ties and connections that can come through.
I think maybe opposition might be a more useful way than for me to try to list off the various types of dharmas. Yes, so I mean there are the ones who want to become perfected immortals, but then, for example, you brought up the Islam. There are the ram-hearted, the ones who serve God. They believe that, that Allah, the most mighty, pulled them from hell so that they can protect mortal Muslims from the night world. And in the book, I describe them in sort of a conciliatory Indonesian Islam style, in that they recognize that there are other dharmas. They are obviously infidels. We can't really do much about them. And there's a lot of bad stuff going on. So sometimes we have to work together. But you could, and I talked with a reader who mentioned this, that some conceptions of the Indian version of Islam are a little bit more strident, not as conciliatory. And so that could be a vector for conflict. For example, what if you have a character who's from the Ale Batin? And how do they reconcile the fact that these creatures say that they are faithful, that they are good Muslims, but they are walking corpses who drink blood?
It really brings up questions as to how much unity is there in the doctrine of unity.
Yes.
The other one that I thought was interesting is we also have the Knights Templar, who are interested very much in protecting people in the Holy Land, and we could either have the Strangers of Bedfellows, where the Ram-Hearted and the Templars are working together to deal with something, kind of like in the second movie where you know that the new threat is the bad guy because you're teaming up with the bad guy from the first movie. Magneto was the bad guy in the first movie, and now you know it's a really big threat because we're teamed up with Magneto in the second movie, or something like that, to use a comic book thing. I think that's also fascinating. Another one that just jumped out at me was the Maya Parasatya. They vow to deal with those the supernatural who have fallen to their own delusions. What does that mean? As a mage player, that's immediately like, oh, we now have hungry dead that hunt down marauders. Or alternatively, view them as, no, these are the only ones who've figured it out. They figured out that there is nothing at the core, and we have to insert whatever we want to into the void. And just all of the groups kind of raise that very interesting question. Similarly, we get information about the celestial tribes, the rootless trees trying to kind of establish their own things, the thrashing dragons kind of being like, hey, hermetics, if you don't let your kids party often enough, this is what you get. Which I kind of liked. But yeah, there's a lot of angles, and there's no clear good guy, bad guy in most cases. There doesn't seem to be a lot of mentions of infernalism, which throughout the World of Darkness is always considered to be the bad guy or something like that. But additionally, a thing for Mage that I appreciate is you introduce this idea kind of of internal alchemy, that there is a process of personal refinement and literal rituals at higher levels that you can do to kind of cultivate and refine that. You do that in a couple ways. One is through the virtue system, which I find useful because in Mage, internal alchemy is mentioned in some spots, but we never really get any information on it. And for instance, you outline that wickedness creates creativity, that it is a properly cultivated, it itself is a virtue as well, just as much as kind of austere restraint.
Yeah.
And anyone kind of looking for an interesting take on that, I would love to see a Wulong mage or someone who is interested in that trying to seek out one of these hungry dead that's like, you've defied the wheel, you've tamed yourself, you are one of the immortals, what can I learn from you?
That's perfect. That's really perfect.
So we have these dharmas. Are there big political factions? Do people tend to agree on them? What kind of is the state of the society, as it were?
As far as larger political factions go, so I sort of left some things in the air. So like we'll take China and the China sort of the Sinosphere as an example. So there was an empire of the dead ruled by the hungry dead, and it basically operated in the shadows of the Ming and the Qing dynasties, but it was a very authoritarian organization, and it posited the supremacy of certain dharmas over others. Basically, if you're not one of the immortal dharmas, you're nothing, you're mud. But in the setting as of 1998, that empire has been destroyed by hungry dead who refuse to follow dharma at all. They call themselves the Scorpion Eaters, and they are sort of philosophically opposed to the idea of personal enlightenment. They are very much, materialist. They believe in, physical power, collective action. So there was a political entity that exploded. And what's left is sort of this wild warring states period where the Scorpion Eaters, they're very good at bomb throwing. They're not very good at ruling. And there are some inheritors of the empire that say like, well, we can do the empire again, but better this time. And so I tried to emphasize sort of an environment where things are chaotic, where the player characters can rise up and do some crazy stuff. So as far as hard political factions go, I gave some examples of things that are up in the air, but there's no sort of universal political entity other than the fact that the dharmas exist, that the dharmas more or less recognize each other as paths of enlightenment. And in being creatures of dharma, they've kind of forged a common night world for themselves.
And this is one of those things again where we can get our mage connections in there, because if,
Yes.
as you mentioned, if there is something of a formal connection for centuries, the technocracy is trying to get hold of mainland China, and if we put the fall of the Qing dynasty at 1911 or so, there might be mages still around that were political puppets in that who've seen the aftermath. There may be people, the Hollowers, that were very interested in what the Scorpion Eaters were telling. Or the Scorpion Eaters, you may have rogue members of those out in the world, and you may have this weird city that is dominated by this kind of night folk no one has ever seen before, that just kind of said, screw it, I'm out, I'm going to be rich and happy, and I'm taking over Topeka, Kansas, or something like that. The same thing that we get whenever we get kind of a new line to play with is something to, for lack of a better term, befuddle our players with.
Yeah.
Because even the most jaded group is going to be like, what are you? And
Yeah.
we have something novel to play with, especially if this is something that formerly if you're playing a technocracy game, there's always the table question of what is the relationship between the 5 elemental dragons and the 5 metal dragons?
Mhm.
Are there East Asian equivalents just subdivisions? Are they just alternate terms? What if they spent a lot of time managing this kind of night folk world, and kind of with the 21st century integration that is kind of posited in Technocracy Reloaded, the rest of the Technocracy is now coming to bear with and trying to figure out. So we also have this like research angle game. It's like, oh, there are these night folk. Also, we have formal relationships. We play mahjong with them every Tuesday or something like that. And suddenly the rest of the Technocracy is like, ah, shit. Huh.
Yeah, I will say for those of your listeners who do pick up the book, I don't go into too much detail about the technocracy as such. Unlike the other mage factions who would have established formal relations with the Hungry Dead, the technocratic society, as I call them there, they are sort of a mystery. All the Hungry Dead really understand is these are sorcerers who hate sorcery, and they use sorcery to destroy sorcery. So to them, it's a little scary and weird. That doesn't preclude the possibility that with time, especially post 1998, they're going to make more contact with each other.
I also like that you call the technocrats those who wear black. I thought that was
Oh,
just
yes.
a good little term for them. And again, in terming, you also make reference. If you don't like this term, just call it the path or the way or something like that. That's gonna be totes cool. So there isn't a centralized political authority, and this kind of makes it a more personal game, and is also kind of a strong break from the themes of Vampire, where you are being politically oppressed. This is now the terror of, oh no, what do we do with the world, rather than the terror of the eternal dread of the Ancilla and the Prince and the so on
That's true.
poking you around. And I think that's fascinating, because it's like, we need to come up with philosophies to survive this oppressive hierarchy. You also need to come up with a philosophy to survive infinite freedom, because that will tear you apart too.
Yes, and I do want to say it's not like there are no politics. The fundamental unit of Hungry Dead society is master and student, right? Because if you don't have a master, you're not going to learn and you are going to be screwed. And so you have this master who teaches you Dharma. You have your fellow students who learn under the same master. You may like them, you may hate their guts, but the master also has friends, fellow masters, and they have masters, and so you end up with basically the political situation if one was to be dropped into the night world of Asia and wanted to figure out the Hungry Dead, it would be more like an incredibly complicated spider web. Like, this master, had a feud with this master 2 centuries ago. So now every time they see each other, it's always, blood feud. This master loves this master. If you ever need help, you go over to them, you give them a token, that sort of thing. So there are still political movements, but it's not monolithic, or at least after 1979, it's not monolithic.
Yeah. And another in that you give, at least that I see for a mage player, is your introduction of talismans. That one of the things that we don't really get in Vampire is how do vampires create cool vampire stuff, which I assume is a thing. But here, it's very much a background. It's like, oh, by the way, it can occupy one of these powers, and I could see a mage stumbling upon one of these items, an enchanted pearl or something like this, and being like, what the? Every time I use it, I feel incredibly tired at the end of it. It seems to suck up quintessence the same way, but it has this weird thing that lies outside the sphere system that I haven't seen before, which is kind of my in to say, okay, we've talked about some of the themes. We've talked about what you are. What are some of the cool things you can do?
Those talismans that you mentioned, I make reference to a particular term. I think it's specific to Buddhism. I might not be correct about that. Called sarira, which are these crystalline mineral deposits that are left behind by enlightened masters when they die. In our world, in the real world, there are these odd, sort of dubious things that people take as evidence of enlightenment. It may or may not be true. In the world of darkness, these deposits, these things that are left behind when someone becomes enlightened, they are 100% real. They absolutely mean what people say they mean. And in the case of the Hungry Dead, having a talisman or knowing of the existence of talismans is the ultimate hope. It says enlightenment is real. There are people who have left, and look at what they've left behind. And it helps that these things that they've left behind are, magic swords and other cool things. But as far as powers go,
you have your Buddhist stupa that has one of these objects of devotion, and suddenly someone's like, yeah, I understand that is an object of important devotion. Also, it's the only thing that will provide the resonance I need to enter the underworld and allow me to sidestep the shroud. So again, we get the cool magic artifact angle if we want to use that from either side. The technocrats are playing with this, get a copy of the Broken Wing Crane or something like that, and are like, what even is this?
Yeah.
Another one of my favorite lines that you mention is how for a while the Hungry Dead viewed the Book of Nod as an allegory. And
Oh,
that
yes.
that just made me think, oh dear, what do the other World of Darkness lines think of when they get these artifacts from from the other lines? But you kind of break out the things into, this is something that you can just do because of your suffering. This is something that you can gain as an additional refinement to it. You break it down into the demon body, god body art, the demon or god body arts, the soul arts, and the demon regalia. Let's just, can we just talk through what those three are?
So why don't we start with the demon arts? So I will say, so the Hungry Dead, in case it hasn't been clear after we've been talking all this time, they are monsters from hell, and that is what they are at the core of their being. They cannot escape it. Well, they could if they follow Dharma, but who knows how long that will take. Because of their essential nature, because they've escaped from hell, they have a piece of hell with them. And when they don't have that under control, that's when you have eruptions of suffering, you have curses that rain down upon the world, blood rain, exploding glass, all that sort of poltergeist stuff. But if they do control it, that's where you get the demon arts. So the Hungry Dead are exceptionally good at torture, murder, mayhem, and other forms of terrible, terrible violence, because that is what hell is. It's the distillation of suffering. And I say that I don't want to invite thoughts that the Hungry Dead are, or power gamers' wet dream or something like that. It's just that they all have an inherent capacity to inflict incredible harm without even thinking about it. So,
Just as two clarifying notes. One, you mentioned Power Gamer. If your game is about reconciling what has happened to your family in your absence, being able to shower blood down is probably not going to be a useful power. So the notion of power gaming is all relative. And as you said, there's a notion of hell that is attached to you. That does not necessarily mean that you are bad in the same way that generally we depict demons, at like Abrahamic demons, as being bad. It is part of your essence and part of your nature, but you very much get to fight that, control it, and define it.
that's
So
correct.
you can rain
Yes.
down blood. That doesn't mean that's the thing you most want to do, and that nor does it mean that's how you want to solve every problem. It just happens to be a tool in your toolbox.
Yes, and it's a tool that pretty much all of them have. As far as the demon arts go, they are very basic. You make a choice. You choose to accumulate suffering, and you choose to let hell build up inside you, and you can become incredibly strong, incredibly fast. You can resist, you can, withstand bullets, things like that. You can even pull pieces of hell out of you in the form of weaponry, mutations. If anybody who listens to this is a fan of Chainsaw Man, there's a particular demon regalia called Embedded Chainsaw that does the exact same thing. The Hungry Dead, at their core, with absolutely nothing else, no dharma, no nothing, they're fresh from hell. They have the ability to inflict violence, and they have the ability to make weaponry appear that can make it easier for them to do. That is what all of them can do. Once you find a master finds you, beats you over the head, and start to learn some dharma, that's when you start to get into the realm of the soul arts. So the Hungry Dead, as I explained in the beginning, they are people who deliberately tore themselves from reincarnation to give themselves another chance in the mortal world. This is a perfect opportunity for me to soapbox on one little thing, if you don't mind.
Oh, by all means.
When people on the internet say that the Kindred of the East are just risen from Wraith, but Asian version, oh, it gets under my skin so much. Because, I mean, even if you talk about genre, like the Risen are the Crow, that's a very particular movie about, vengeance and love and stuff like that. Very Wraith. The Hungry Dead are not that. They are renegades with no place. There is no love or revenge that they can resolve that will stop them from being a creature of hell. I do want to put that out there. Anyway, the soul arts. So, because they are separate from the various realms of the universe, they sort of have what you could consider four different souls, or you could consider them fractured pieces of a whole soul that's connected to the universe. And those fractures are based on the Buddhist realms of existence. To give people who aren't familiar with Buddhism a basic primer, you have the realm of demons, the realm of beasts, the realm of humankind, the realm of ghosts, hungry ghosts, and then the realm of gods. And then in some traditions, you have the realm of Asura, who are sort of gods, but sort of mean. What the soul arts do is the hungry dead who learn a little bit more about what they are and how they can rise a state, they can channel the power of the various realms of the universe and make things happen. So they can channel the ghost realm and they can become more ghost-like. What does that mean? They can become invisible. They can put a shroud over the environment so that no one sees what they're doing. They can make people suffer because the nature of a hungry ghost is to always be starving. They can make people feel like they're starving and like they're dying, and that no amount of food or water is ever going to make them feel better again. On the opposite end, if they channel the realm of gods, they can channel glory, they can channel beauty, they can see the markings of destiny on other people and see who's going to be a great person, who's destined for something amazing. They can, make people strong and charming by giving them the blessings of the gods, things like that. And the soul arts are basically their way of reconnecting with the entirety of the universe by practicing soul cultivation.
That's a useful breakdown because you say, okay, they have this view that there are these four different essences that they can draw on.
Yeah.
And that gives, again, that real rough outline of power. And the interesting thing is, all the abilities you mentioned, none of them are that combat wombat stuff. They're all how I'm going to influence the world around you. And as kind of a side note, I also like, you mentioned Chainsaw Man as one of the inspirations. I like that that is third. It goes the Lotus Sutra, the Upanishads, Chainsaw Man. So
I didn't realize
yeah,
that. Oh.
when I was going through, I'm like, okay, familiar with that. Okay, familiar with that. That's a new one. That's a new one for me. Okay. Just in case you're worried about like, I don't know, this game sounds a little frou-frou and a little too refined for me. I really don't want to deal with the polis. Kind of another thing that's interesting about this is the Hungry Dead also explicitly have the ability to interface with spirits.
Yes.
And this is something that we only get to kind of a ridiculous amount in Werewolf or a de minimis amount in Vampire via like the Giovanni and just dealing with the undead. I see a really interesting angle of your characters needing a Hungry Dead escort or mentor or to do favors because they want to do something specific in the spirit wilds. You make mention of the totem courts, the beast courts, different than the other beast courts, but more or less where you have these powerful middle umbral spirits that they're interfacing with. Kind of how do the Hungry Dead view and interface with those spirit entities?
Yeah, so earlier when I was describing the soul arts, and I mentioned, that the Hungry Dead have four souls, or they could be considered sort of four aspects of the universe. That's very literal, depending on how much you cultivate it. So all of the Hungry Dead can, with a little bit of effort and a little bit of chi, they can see into the shallows of the spirit realms. So what does that mean? If they cultivate their devil soul, it means that they can see the markings of hell and corruption. If they cultivate their heavenly soul, they can see basically the dreaming. Because what's the difference between a dream and a prayer, really, when it gets down to it? If they, cultivate their beast soul, they can see into the shallows of the middle umbra, the spirit wilds. And the ghost soul, obviously, they can see into the shadowlands. And with more practice, what they can do is they can actually open gateways to go through. And so this is one of the reasons why Kindred of the East is sort of unique in the world of darkness, because they can connect all the other supernaturals together and sort of create an environment where parlay is not just an oddity or a rare, once in a century event. It happens all the time because you have these guys or gals who can basically just, knock on the door and say hello to their in the particular being's stomping grounds.
Yeah, having that kind of liaison is pretty potent, and having a character that can both go to the underworld and to the middle umbra is kind of unique, which I appreciated. The other thing that you made mention of is what is the difference between a prayer and a dream? We now have a group that isn't necessarily changelings that may have an intense interest in the dreaming or the dream realms or the dream zone, depending on how you play that. And you may have a character that can normally mages see the etheric ocean as just this roiling mass as they fall from dream to dream to dream. But one of the Hungry Dead may be able to bring some order to that and can kind of act as a guide. They're not going to really solve all the problems for them, but can at least show them around. And as Hsien was mentioning, like there are, to go back to the power question, there are a lot of interesting things you can do. We have or will make mention of the god bodies, which are just kind of another variant preparation
Yes.
that allows you to do things. And it's stuff like very practical things like summon storms, but some of them are very flavorful. For instance, the god body of Poxes allows you to basically instill someone with this clarifying fever, which lets them cure, and suddenly your characters are trying to deal with someone who has dealt with a bout of quiet or has a paradox flaw they need to deal with or has some sort of supernatural infection that magic isn't doing, and now they need to seek out someone who is familiar with the god body of Poxes. They need to make it through this fever stage and come out the other end. You have someone who is trying to master coastal stormcraft. Somebody with the appropriate god body is going to be like, I'll show you how to do some storms. Each one of these has a system: tread the dragon's tail, learn to walk lightly, and float like a feather. Another thing that you do is you are not bound by the systems that we already have in the World of Darkness. So it's interesting just to see someone's take where sometimes it's stat plus ability, and now we get slightly larger dice pools. Or you care about the differences between a dice pool and the difficulty to determine some other mechanics. Since it is not really bound to that, we also get kind of that refreshing take on things. Of the god bodies, do you have a favorite or anyone that you think is particularly evocative or cool?
As a longtime fan of Kindred of the East, I just can never let go of the god body of Jade because it's the wushu power. You get to do the high flying stunts and all that stuff. But as far as what I made of them and find interesting, gosh, there were the classics that I just love because I'm a longtime fan. Jade, blood, bone, flesh, flame, and ash, which was a little different from how it was originally conceived. But those are the classics that I brought over, and they are pretty much literally what they say on the tin. You can manipulate bone, manipulate blood. But yeah, as far as a favorite that I made, I enjoyed the God Body of Illusion because it's forbidden for you to talk about vampire. But I enjoyed taking chemistry from the Ravnos and sort of, I feel like when chemistry was originally conceived, it was, just an illusion power, which is, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then trying to turn it into a religious or dharmic tool to show people that reality is not real. I really enjoyed that. Yeah. And I hope that some people who bring in the Hungry Dead get to bring in some people who follow Maya Parisatya, because they can really mess up your day, mess up your perception.
And just even the
Yeah.
first preparation, the root of illusion, the ability to unveil a single unspoken desire from someone in the vicinity. I can see that being someone who can either sow an exceptional amount of chaos in a chantry or figure out the weird motivations for the technocrats. Why are they particularly interested in this neighborhood? What's the in we get? How can I bribe this bartender or get them to be in my favor? And then second and third, we just have illusion powers until we get to the fourth preparation, Rakshasa Blade, which allows them to manifest it. And what if a mage is like, oh, you can manifest an impossible object. You can manifest a Penrose triangle, which is a triangle with three 90-degree angles to it. What does it mean for reality when a character is just like, there's nothing at the heart of creation, why can't this exist? And to embody both creativity and nihilism in the same package, I think is just plain fun. So, and
Yeah, but I will echo that you really liked the God Body epoxes. I really liked introducing them. The God Body epoxes did not exist originally. I made it up whole cloth with a little bit of help from Exalted. I feel like epoxes really encapsulates the sort of thematic mood of the Hungry Dead. They can be utterly horrific, splatterpunk galore, but at the same time it can be something so refined and insightful at the same time.
the other thing that's kind of interesting is you include the forbidden art of hell weaving. So in addition to the god bodies, we also have arts. They tie to kind of a different thing, and you also give a way to build your own. And I just like also having an agent that has a fundamentally different relationship with what we would call the demonic. They know hell, but they are not a member of hell's legions. They were a victim to it, if anything else. And just the idea of a demon having very mixed feelings about what a mortal infernalist is doing, either being like, yeah, this is just a choice people make and they can do it or they can not do it, and ultimately they will pay for it. Or alternatively, the mages are like, how do we stop this? There's nothing in our toolbox that can deal with this. And someone's like, oh yeah, Mark, the demon of 1,000 eyes and infinite whips, I know him. We were in a darts league together. So to kind of have access to that familiarity with the underworld while being neither some sort of righteous savior nor just another member of the Legion of Hell, it just has a fundamental different relationship with it, I think is also kind of an interesting angle that we can bring in, especially when someone's like demon and someone in the Hunger Dead's like, technically no, but I could see why you would think that.
Yeah. Let's get into that a little bit more. So hell weaving, it is basically the Hungry Dead using the hell inside them beyond sort of the basic violent applications of the demon arts to create sort of something glorious and potentially very dangerous, because you have to build and build and build suffering in order to use hell weaving. For the mage players who want to, or mage storytellers, I suppose, who tired of Nefandi and want to bring in something different. There are the Ebon Masks, who are the one true heretical dharma, the one that everyone would hate, because they believe that nothing is real except hell. Hell is the only true reality. Everything else is an illusion that springs from it. So the closer that you can get to hell, the better off that the world will be. Bring some of those guys in, and I could imagine that you'd have a very good time.
Just that unknown antagonist. And one of the interesting things that, as you mentioned, that by escaping from hell, you've freed yourself from the cycle of reincarnation, kind of for good or for ill. Everyone kind of recognizes that this is their last go, and things can go very bad very quickly. So you're not dealing with maybe a true demon that if they die, they just get dispersed. You're dealing with something that can plan and plot and is not looking to necessarily amass a cult, which you may normally associate with it, but may have very different notions of corruption, which again I
Mhm.
appreciate. So we've talked about the powers. What's their gas tank? What's the thing that they look for?
Oh, sure. I mean, they're hungry. So at their core, they can always tap into suffering, right? And that makes them into murder machines. But as far as what keeps them going in the mortal world and what can lead them to more refinement, it's chi. It's the energy of life. I suppose if I wanted to keep it in line with dharma being Sanskrit, I would have called it prana, but they call it chi in the original game. I kind of like the simplicity of it. So it's chi, it's not blood. So most of the time, most of the player characters of the Hungry Dead are going to be drinking blood, because that's all they can get to, really. But they start off with flesh. They can always eat flesh. And they evolve into the ability to drink blood pretty early on, but then they stay there for a while. With further enlightenment, it is possible for them to steal chi through breath, to just be close enough to a human being to breathe their air, and you can kill them. No, potentially, or at least take from them. And then you go even further into enlightenment, the level of what you'd consider a master or a grandmaster, and they can take chi, the energy of life from the world itself, but it's not like it's for free. They keep doing that, and you'll get the classic blighted land cursed by the presence of one of the hungry dead. So the only way out is to become fully enlightened for them. Until then, they're always going to be hungry.
And now we suddenly have an inn that also this chi gathers in particular places called dragon nests. Mages are going to recognize that as nodes. They may either be something where mages are like, there's something interesting happening here. It's not quite what we're used to, and we don't know how to tap into it, but it seems to have some sort of supernatural energy. Or again, you have an area that is blighted because we have one of these masters in the area that isn't quite peripatetic enough to allow the area to recover, and just a whole neighborhood is dealing with it. And just the idea that that only comes with mastery, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're like a crazy murder machine, but they're not a new kid on the block, certainly by that gives us kind of that other angle of doing it. And a lot of the powers that we mentioned, the ability to invoke righteousness and to cause a number of statements that the character issues to just kind of be true for the rest of the scene. Frequently, chi is called on for that.
Yeah, actually, I should mention, because you mentioned how what fuels their powers. So they need chi simply to live, but a mark of a mature hungry dead, one that deserves their place, is that they can use chi for elevated purposes. So at the higher levels of the soul arts, were the ones where you start crossing into different realms and you start embodying gods and demons and things like that. Those cost chi. The god bodies, well, they're structured a little weirdly, which I'll let people find out how exactly. But you use chi to kind of supercharge what you can already do into even more powerful applications. So it's chi is a fuel. It's a refined substance that they kind of play with in different ways. So it's a very different relationship from blood points or vitae.
So we've kind of established their powers, what there are, their political blocks, where they come from, kind of their unique relationship with the world. Anything kind of else about them before we talk for some of the Meiji angles that we might want to look at, like a
Sure.
basic feature that we haven't mentioned yet, or something that you're like, hey, there's also this cool thing. Because at the end
Yes,
of the
yes.
day, one of the things that the book strongly encourages is play this, add it to your game, have fun with it. Don't just read it. Do some homework. We're all trying.
Some settings are not as welcoming to everyone lately. And so I would really, really set out for this to be something that everybody can pick up and use. And we all have the internet now, which people in 1998 definitely did not have.
Yup.
And you can tell. But bless them, they tried. They loved anime and they tried. As far as other special things to bring up, the Hungry Dead can have children. That's a very important thing that you should know. Everybody listening, they can absolutely have kids, and they're little vampire hunter Ds. They are called Dhampir, and they are awesome.
And the mechanism of their creation, I'm going to leave it to the reader, was fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time to read through that. But you also posit that the Dhampirs have kind of this luck pool. And this is another angle where a mage may run into one of these creatures, where they are notionally seemingly human, but they seem to have unusually good luck. They can kind of learn basic levels of powers to certain things. They may have a relationship varying from grudging indebtedness to loving respect for their hungry dead parent, but they can be active during the day without difficulty, and so on. So that gives us kind of another angle to do.
I guess it's kind of to use a virtual adept sort of comparison. Dhampirs are they're sort of like humans where the universe divided by zero, because the Hungry Dead, they are not part of the world. They are separate from the wheel of reincarnation and the wheel of existence. And yet they made a child who is. One could theorize that this incredible luck that the Dhampirs can draw on. They can basically live Hong Kong action life and escape from it unscathed, is because they are just these glitches who shouldn't exist, and yet they do. And so they're able to sort of exploit that to their benefit.
And again, they don't have that, or at least that I read, they didn't really have that taint of hell to them. There's no obvious sign, except for maybe someone who does aura reading finds that there's this slight entropic string to them. And not entropic in this decay sense, but kind of in this blessing sense. Or this may be a character that a mage would detect as having a high destiny background or something like that, or otherwise being touched. And it just kind of adds that little bit more creativity and also gives them a little bit more of an edge, as you mentioned, gives them the Hong Kong action life. They can keep up with your characters, and that is just kind of useful in a character following them around.
They do have a little bit of an edge in that if they basically lose humanity, which you may not use humanity in your games, but if they kind of go too far and they kind of break their moral code, there is a sense in which they'll kind of go, excuse my language, fuck it. And they will become very, very violent and possibly a little bit cannibalistic for the scene. And someone who doesn't know what they are will think, what the hell just happened to Dave? But if you know that they're the child of an immortal monster, it makes perfect sense.
He has her father's eyes.
Yeah.
And just rip them out of someone else. Yeah. We also get that you kind of introduced here that won't necessarily be new for people familiar with vampires, but you also have rules for kind of demon hunters. And I could certainly see characters running into that, being perceived as being one of the hungry dead, and just kind of having that mistaken identity thing that can sometimes happen to Mage, where people who are like, I hate the night, I hate the supernatural and vampires, and people, and on the mortal side or the hunter side, suddenly them realizing that the world is a little bit bigger than they think. And either the mage is being introduced to a new type of antagonist, one of the characters having been kidnapped, or someone having information like, oh, okay, I caught you on tape doing this ritual while I was trying to monitor this dragon's nest. I know that you're not one of them, but in exchange for me erasing this, you're going to have to do me a favor, or something like that. And again, that just gives us that other little in. What kind of are the nature of demon hunters in the world of the Hungry Dead?
I will be 100% honest with your listenership and tell you that I also like Demon Slayer, which I think it might be the most popular anime in the world, at least of the last couple of years. And so with the Demon Hunters, there was an original supplement, I think in 1998, called Demon Hunter X.
Yup.
Everybody loves it. So in there were the Shi who, they were able to refine their internal chi to access supernatural powers. And there was a whole mythology about Yi the Archer. Very good stuff. Very worth getting that book. And I sort of presented a simplified version of that, where there are these demon hunters. They've passed down these techniques to be able to access their chi, to do certain things like, that basically give them the ability to fight supernaturals without being turned into blood paste. But What I wanted was in the way that the powers are built, you have these sort of slight advantages that you can get from using your chi a certain way. If you use it another way, you harm yourself, but you can access a pretty significant power for a very short time. So I wanted demon hunters in my iteration, the way that I put them together, to have this feeling of desperation and constantly making a hard choice. How far are they willing to go? How much do they hate the creatures of the night? Are they willing to destroy themselves to do it? And so, as far as how they would interact with mages, you could have them be very noble and have a sort of a doomed gracefulness to them, or you could have them be total psychopaths. So you have your options there.
Yeah, we get the idea that there are loose cannons out there, that it's like, hey, I know how much damage these people are going to do. It's okay if I burn down the entire apartment building in an attempt to get to them. Or it's
Yeah.
okay if I use my loved ones as to be providing the chi that I need for this. This is why my family is dealing with constant headaches or medical issues, because it allows me to underwrite or power my nighttime demon hunting. And again, Mage famously a game without a humanity track. So I
That's
could see
true.
Mage as being like, I like the cut of your jib, bud. Really, you're putting your back behind it. I appreciate that.
And I suppose then to kind of bring it all back to what I want people to take away from this version of Kindred of the East, a dynamic that isn't always explored in games would probably be family and how difficult family can be. So if you have Dampier, you have a nightmare parent who can never die and will always be stronger than you. And if you have demon hunters, a lot of how demon hunters, at least the ones that I wrote about in Asia, the way that they work, they make their families train and they keep the secret. And you're not allowed to have a normal life because you're in a demon hunter family. People who are playing mage and who bring these characters in, they may find something that resonates with them, that family is so important, but family can make you powerless too.
One of the things that we frequently deal with in Mage is, for whatever reason, no one at the table is frequently married or has children in terms of their characters, and kind of showing the importance of those connections and threads and what they do in terms of role playing for both positive and negative. There's any number of games where having family ties allows you to recover from seeing the unknown horrors of an infinite cosmos. And as you mentioned, here is an example of like, no, it's not all, it's not all helping us recovering willpower at the end of the day. And I feel like we answered the question of how might a mage run into one of the hungry dead. Were there any other ideas or interesting philosophical or paradigmatic bits or worldviews or cultures that you think that would be useful to notice and go, hey, this is in here too?
Sure. I suppose one useful thing for people who want to bring in stuff from this book into their games, what they should know is, or what, I'm sorry, no, they might know this already, but maybe keep it in mind, is that the West has very much affected the East for a lot longer than people think. Running first contact games is fun, of course, but that's not at all the full dimension of what one can do. So like, you could like, for example, the leader of the Arcanum is an Indian guy in New Delhi. In the book, I posit that there is another branch of the Arcanum in Taipei, and they've been there for a while. Japan, in their quest for Westernization, they have a lot of Western influence. You could have someone from Tokyo who is Japanese and is a trained hermetic because of course they know how to do that stuff. I think that sort of mixing and matching can have a lot of potential, like British influence in Hong Kong. In Southeast Asia, you have just this total melange of influences. You could have, like I don't know anything about French magic, for example, but you could have it in Vietnam. So, and of course, there are questions of colonialism and things like that you could get into if you want to. But the fact of the matter is, it exists. These cultures are all blended together in some areas that I feel players can really have a fun time with taking what they know and putting in a little bit of what they don't. They don't have to go whole hog with learning about Korean shamanism, for example, just to be able to play a character.
Yeah, we don't
Yeah.
we don't need an experienced Mudang at the table necessarily. And one of the things that always took me back was the first time I learned about like some of the Altaic beliefs, and you hear about like the Buddha fashioning the world, and you're like, wait, what? Who did this? And it's like, wait, Ravana is a person, not a place, but is misunderstood, and the Asuras are merely lost angry versions of the okay, I'm gonna have to sit down. So it's just the belief is probably a lot more varied than we're giving it credit for, and I would be fascinated to see, are there westernized thousand hells? Like, is there the hell of fast food tedium or something where you pay for a terrible corporate life or something like that? And I think that that's also kind of a fun, weird thing to play with if you're not comfortable maybe going out of it. You're like, wait, where did you escape from? And you had a paper hat, and you spend eternity
Oh yeah.
asking if people if they wanted fries, and now you're back to get justice against who? Yeah, I guess we're friends. Like, reality is frequently weirder than we give it credit for. To quote Robin Laws, if history were written as a fiction book, everyone would call it unbelievable or unrealistic. So,
I did try my hand at some Western hells in an earlier draft. I wasn't happy with them, so I think people should go hog wild. If they want to have some Western Yama Kings who caught wind of the Demon Emperor prophecy and they decide they want some of that, go for it.
one last item that appears in the game that I found very compelling is the text of the broken wing crane. What is that, and what does it represent in the world?
The Broken Wing Crane in the real world, our world, was a book. It was a book in Kindred of the East that was said to be a book that will be written in the future, but isn't yet. Its existence kind of reverberates backward through time. Again, for those of you familiar with Buddhism, it's sort of like the Maitreya Buddha, who is said to be from the end of time, but we worship him now because he's made himself available backwards in time. Buddhism can be pretty crazy stuff. Broken Wing Crane was essentially devised as sort of an evil version of the Maitreya, and then it made its way into Exalted, where I think it became ironically more famous there. But I brought it back for the Relentless Age, and I tried to emphasize that it is, on one level, it's a book. It's a book that will be written someday, and on the other hand, it's pieces of a book that exist right now, but they don't all make sense, and they're all sort of unsettling Lovecraftian fragments of something that is yet to be whole. And then at the same time, it's an intelligence. It's the evil Buddha, basically, that wants to be made into something real. I suppose for mage games, it would be very interesting to bring this in because there is this question of, is enlightenment something that you obtain, or is it something that chooses you? And what is enlightenment? Is the broken wing crane enlightenment in a way? I mean, if you ask an Eben Massey, I would say absolutely yes, it is. But yeah, those are things that I think its existence. I mean, it also serves as, let's be frank, it serves as a MacGuffin too.
Oh yeah, the MacGuffinist MacGuffin.
Yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
book.
At last, I have obtained all the pieces of. Yeah, you
Yeah.
could absolutely do that. Yes.
The thing that jumped out to me is like the obvious parallels to how some people treat artificial general intelligence. And suddenly we have these characters that are dreaming these bits of code to eventually create the AGI that will rule eternity, and the parallels to Rocco's Basilisk and the idea of retrocausality of something ultimately going back and kind of causing it, or someone saying this is the inevitable state of things. The idea that the Demon Age is ruled by a malevolent AI. And suddenly the Yama Kings are like, oh shit, we guessed wrong. I just think it's one of those things where the parallels across other beliefs, and I don't want to say apocalyptic, but there being this big thing. I am not familiar with Buddhist eschatology at all to even opine on it, but just the idea that of necessity it generates tulpas of itself, or this is going to be born of a mortal, or this is used to justify someone with a high destiny background. There are just so many angles in on this, and what does it mean for the Hungry Dead to start taking an interest in the digital web because they hear about the parallels between this and AGI development or something like that. So like not a thing that comes up in the polycanon, but still, I thought it was pretty fascinating. And as you mentioned, it's a MacGuffin if you wanted to be that, but for a game about fighting about different worldviews, it's pretty great. Also, to me, anything like that gives a justification for, hey, this is why Time 2 doesn't work. I find pretty useful to be like, nope, it's a thing radiating from the future so strongly that you can't scry and see what happens. And that's always kind of a big deal in Mage. It's also, if you want to have a tie-in with the Green Sun Princes of the Infernals, and you want to bring in, I don't know, Scottish Cannibal or Lesbian Stripper Ninja, you're more than welcome to bring those characters in. See Systematic Understanding of Everything, my podcast about Exalted, for more information about Giant Claw Subway Metro Card Man. We did have one or two listener questions. So, in this reworking, did the Great Leap Outward happen, or is it about to happen? This is an idea that in the meta plot of The Line That Shall Not Be Named, there is a large movement of the Hungry Dead to the West Coast, and they cause all sorts of issues out there. Has that happened? Does that happen? Can it happen in this variant?
In a way, it has happened slowly in the sense that the Hungry Dead are in California and they have been. But in the sense of, frankly, what it was originally, which was, got to get Whitey kind of in a way, that not quite so much. The original conception of the Great Leap Outward was, yeah, that finally we Asians will have revenge on the terrible white man or something like that, which was very ill-conceived. And then later on in the line, in the original line, it became sort of this, well, it's because the elders are getting really tired of all these questions from the youngins, and they're trying to send them out on a suicide mission so that, some of the pressure's off. And that's a slightly better interpretation of what's going on. But as far as in the setting as I've built it, it can happen, but not in a concerted sort of wave. This isn't Red Dawn, if you know what I mean. The Dharmas have been in California since the gold rush, at a minimum. The petals of virtue, the Chinese immortal ones, they heard that people were rising in California without any help, and they thought that's very bad. So they sent people over. So the Hungry Dead have been in Chinatown in San Francisco for a minimum of 100 years. And they've only recently made themselves known, which makes the anarchs from the game, which will not be named, very pissed off. But then, as far as takeovers of institutions of the supernatural world, that's happening more on an individual basis. So I write about in Southern California, there is a Korean Chinese restaurant called the Lucky Bat, where supernaturals from Asia or of Asian descent, they kind of know that that's a huge node. It's a huge dragon's nest. You can go there, you can get your chi, and you can hang out and meet other people like you. As of right now, they're pretty chill because their sort of mascot, the head waitress named Tiffany, she's very chill. But as pressure builds, ironically, because they're gathering, and so the other supernaturals are like, why are these people all gathering around this powerful node? They must be up to something. There is a possibility that they will basically say, screw it, we're taking over this town. Especially if someone tries to hurt Tiffany. To answer the person's question, the Great Leap Outward can happen. It has not happened yet, not exactly in the way that it originally did. And if it did happen, it would happen piecemeal and face to face.
But as you mentioned, there's nothing preventing someone who is very potent in a dharma just pulling on a lot of their personal ties to say, hey, these Canaanites are an affront to the notion of death. They are not giving us due honor. They are a mockery of the true nature of what it is to be immortal. They need to be cleansed. And then you could have a personal kind of vendetta or army that just kind of moves through an area. And by army, I mean probably in the dozens at most. I also like the plot hook that you have that Tiffany has warned that every bit of chi taken from the Lucky Bat Dragon's Nest is a gnat bite on a sleeping giant. What does that mean? Up to you. It sounds cool, though. Always like that in the games. The next question was, is it a matter of local consensus what causes souls to go to the Yomi Hells and what allows for the Wankoi to rise? Wankoi being a previous term for the Kindred of the East in the games is published. Do you need to die with the appropriate burial ceremonies? How does that work? We answered that earlier. No, it can be either a combination of weird circumstances, because hell be like that sometimes. The underworld isn't always as tidy, and it's clear that there doesn't seem to be a burial ceremony requirement of it that may have existed in previous versions.
Yeah, I'd say that if you're hungry dead, it's because you were a terrible person or because hell do be like that sometimes.
Yeah, so that tie has kind of been broken in a way that that kind of makes sense. Do you have any recommendations for what would presage the Age of Sorrows, the starting of the Third Age? Any omens or signs that you could include in a game to indicate that no, we're a little bit closer to the Age of the Demon Kings?
Yeah, so there are a few things that I put in the book. So one is the Week of Nightmares, Zapathasura, the blood god, arguably the progenitor of Clan Ravnos, rises up, kills a whole lot of people, and then is finally taken down by the technocracy in Bangladesh, right? I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with that. That is either a sign or it was the turning of the age because one person finally said, I'm going to be the demon emperor. He didn't succeed, but still, the fact that one person made their bid, you could say, okay, now the genie's out of the bottle. Another sign. So there's a particular hell called the Wicked City, the Hell of Modernity. Some of your listeners may recognize it from the original Thousand Hells. I've sort of refigured it to be, it's sort of an experiment because it was created by geomantically manipulating the 38th parallel in North Korea to basically create a hell out of Earth's chi. The problem is it's growing. It's sort of latched onto this very new, very potent idea of hell, this kind of Kafka-esque nightmare of like you were saying, working for McDonald's or any sort of other horrible thing that breaks your soul down. And as the Age of Sorrows gets closer, the Wicked City appears more and more in every city. There are some obvious contenders, Seoul, Hong Kong, Manila, but what if it shows up in Fresno, for example? These pockets of hell where you suddenly enter and then there's you know, oil and gear and gears and demons and all that sort of stuff. What do you do then? How do you get rid of something like that? Other signs. Would mage players be familiar with Fomori from Werewolf?
Give a quick explainer of what they are.
Okay, they're human beings who are merged with what are called Bane spirits, which are like these spirits of corruption. And so they are sort of these people with monstrous mutations, think sort of like Toxic Avenger type, splatterpunk, gross horror type stuff. So in Kindred of the East, at least in my book, so they used to be called bakemono, which just means monster in Japanese. It's not very useful. But again, it was 1998. They tried. In my version, I've renamed them as half devils because these Amori, as they would be considered in the West, they are very specifically humans who have bonded with spirits from the Thousand Hells, with demons. Not just any demons. There's a theory, at least from what I wrote in Tibet, that each spirit that creates a half devil is actually an emanation of the Yama Kings, who are so vast in their spirit that they can't contain themselves, and pieces of them break off into the mortal world and become half devils. So your mages in your average game, they may encounter these people who seem freakish and pathetic, and they're mutated and they're violent and they have these horrible appetites and they seem worthless. They seem like mooks to mow through and get rid of. But what are they really? As they increasingly appear, as they survive and become more intelligent and start to band together, what are they doing? So I'd say that's another big sign of the Age of Sorrows.
The line you mentioned about the Wicked City in the Thousand Hells, we learn about Mikabashi. I just like the fact that it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you thought the Yama Kings were beings in the traditional sense. They're actually places, and they're slowly trying to materialize in the world, and they could be an area of verdant but disfiguring growth, or a perfectly replicating suburban enclave that has absolute geometric precision from the hell of infinite PTA meetings or something like that. And there's a lot of ways you can go with that. That starts appearing, that becomes your introduction as opposed to meeting one of the hungry dead in the first place. And that's another angle we can go with our games. And luckily, with there being 1,000 hells, I don't know them all to be enumerated. So as you mentioned earlier, make one up. If you're looking for more information on the Wicked City, it also is the Kindred of the East Time of Judgment scenario, or at least one of them. So yeah, we get to bring in yet more.
That's true.
It is obvious that you have kind of put your back into this work, and that just about anyone is going to take something from it. And more impressively, it is pay what you want.
Yeah, it was a gift to the community. So I see a lot of people who are kind of hesitant. I guess there are a lot of very sweet people who they say that they don't want to take it for free. They feel guilty about it. I've seen that once or twice. No, 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 no. Just please just download it. Please just read it. The author wants you to have it for free.
But I won't be opposed if people give you money. So as someone who's undertaken this massive working, what advice do you have someone who says, hey, there's this World of Darkness idea that's out there that's kind of cool, but it just doesn't quite mesh with my culture or my view of things? What do you say to that person to get them started?
Do you have an example?
say for instance somebody was not thrilled with let's take a couple of angles for this. Someone says the Fianna are a little bit off, or someone says the Hsien are weird, I'm not sure how to incorporate them, or there's no India representation in Mage, more or less, and
Mhm.
how to kind of take that and just kind of make it exist. What recommendation do you have to someone who says this isn't bad, I think we can do better, and I want to share with the world?
The ultimate thing, of course, is to do the work, right? To just write it. I think at the end of the day, no matter what else I say, that's what it is. If you want to do it, if you want to see it exist, then you should just do it. As far as what helped me, let's see. So if someone wanted to redo the Fianna and they are of Irish descent, that could theoretically be very easy. I don't actually know how in touch the average Irish person is with their mythology and folklore. Let's say you're Irish American. You don't actually know that much. You just know that what you've seen is not quite correct. We live in this glorious age where you have everything you could ever want to know at your fingertips. You should take advantage of it. If you can find a way to build a community, that would be even better. These Kindred of the East books, well, I'm sorry, the first two attempts that I kind of did for, the first cycle, and then the Relentless Age, which is I consider the complete book. And then actually, right, it's funny you mentioned the Hsien because that's my next project. I'm working on Changeling thing. That's all stuff that I've been working on and posting drafts of things on forums, specifically on RPGnet. And it's been very rewarding to get fans of Kindred of the East, fans of the Lands of 8 Million Dreams, and people who just know the World of Darkness, or they have a particular background, and they're able to give me little tidbits that I wouldn't necessarily know. Like I had this one reader, came from Singapore, and he was able to kind of speak to, I think it's a he, Singaporean meritocracy and how it's a little bit of a myth, and how but people kind of cling to it like it's an illusion that everyone wants to still believe in, the average Singaporean person. It's that sort of thing where you're able to get the flavor of real life, and that wouldn't be possible without having the internet and having a community that you can build from all over the world. That's what I'd say. The three things are: do the work, use the internet, build a community, and beyond that, you'll probably be okay.
And by build a community, part of that is taking advantages of existing ones. You did a bunch of this through RPGnet. You did a first draft kind of through Storyteller Vault, and you got feedback through that before the 200-page version came out. The 40-page version came out,
Yes.
and the 200-page version is littered with art and has nice white space in it to make for kind of a balanced page as you're reading through. So it's not 200 pages of densely packed prose. This is something you can do. And Hsien, I think you've done a great example and kind of set a benchmark for being like, I did it, and I'm not charging you for it. Your move, which I certainly appreciate,
I,
the inner hermetic in all of us.
I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but there was sort of this satisfaction because the refrain that you'd often see around Kindred of the East was, oh, this was, during like the 20th anniversary, they would say, oh, they could never even do a Kindred of the East 20th anniversary. It would be impossible. Impossible. And once it was on the Storyteller's Vault, this version, the Relentless Age, a little part of me did say, impossible, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, impossible frequently means just not done yet. So,
Yeah.
and now it has. Thank you so much for your time. If people are interested in your upcoming Hsien work, is there a place where they can follow that or otherwise see what you're up to? The answer may just be no, and I can just point them to your page on Storyteller Vault.
Yeah, I mean, I'm posting on RPGnet, the Changeling stuff. I'm sorry, before the thing about Kindred of the East that you may want to know is that the Hungry Dead very often have a predilection for becoming addicted to Changeling blood.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw that. That was kind of interesting.
yeah,
That the
just
little god, a certain
we're
fondness for
gonna
the taste of
leave
the little
that,
gods.
but
Okay.
yeah, let's not go into more detail about that. We can just leave that exactly as it is.
Okay.
In any case, I'm working on that on RPGnet. You can probably find it. Just search for my username, Hsienfan. And otherwise, yeah, I mean, you can point them to the Storyteller's Vault book. I did say, please just download it, but if you do want to pay me, you can buy it twice, just so you know. Other than that, yeah, those are I'm not really on social medias. I got scared for a second when you contacted me wanting to talk.
Well, I hope it's gone acceptably well.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I was like, oh my God, why does someone want to talk to me? No, but this was very, very fun. Thank you so, and I really I appreciate that you read it so thoroughly and that you find it so exciting. And I hope you use it in your games.
I hope to too.
Yeah,
Hsien, thank you so much for your time.
of course.
This has been Mage the Podcast, where if we reworked Kindred of the East, something has gone horribly wrong. The show is made possible by Ben Bendelow, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger through just rewatching Welcome Back Kotter episodes. Buck Gregory, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger by just taking a nap and hoping it all goes away. Christopher Phillips, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger by simply switching to a higher fiber, higher protein diet. Guy Stewart, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger by hunting for elves. Jay Widener, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger by realizing that that's just your opinion, man. Josh Hillerup, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger by repeatedly listening to Hunger Strike by Temple of the Dog. Mikhail, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger through Obsessive Decoupage. Pukaji, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger through Strange and Esoteric Dance. Sean Gallagher, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger through Competitive Yodeling. The Crew of Erebus, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger by obsessing on the world of competitive pog playing. Saint UX Player, Oracle of Mastering Dark Hunger through just indulging in it constantly with no limitations, which technically means you're not mastering it at all, but still gets you to the same place. Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Brad the Blue, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Derek Semsick, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Aran, and Archmaster Nathan Weaver, as well as Alex, Alexia, Ambiversion, Anders S., Anon Badurfi, Berto, Blaze Hibbert, Blake Ryan, Brandon, Brian Perry, Bubba the Pale One, Chris Blake, Sin Shodas, Daniel Cuppin, Daniel Scribner, Darren Hennessy, David Roy, Dennis Osborne, Eli Levenger, Eric Schwenk, Fragorock, George Laura, Henry Kraft, Eable, Jason Kennedy, Jason Vines, Jason W. Briggs, Jay Gatsby, Jeff Bryn, Jenna F., Jervis Johnson, John Magnuson, Jolyn Andes, Laws and Stuff, Joshua Heath, Kathleen Halperin, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Michael Pearl, Michael Creedle, Michael Parker, Nibero, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klemenov, Oliver Schindler, Patrick McNamara, Patrick Mulder, Rachel Grace, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Rubem Joseph, Ryan Stray, Rob H., Ryan Kenny, Samuel Tobin, Starfish, Stephen Carton, Thrice Great, Vincent Hamilton, Walter, William Connolly, and William Martin. Our EP shout-out this week is to Walter. What isn't there to say about Walter? Are they Walt Disney, Walt Frazier, Walt Whitman, Walt Mossberg, Walter Koenig, Walter Mondale, Walt McPherson, Walter Bruce Willis, Walter Matthau, Walter Mercado, or even Walter Cronkite. I'd like to think that Walter is all of these, and more, caught up in wacky hijinks due to either some quantum leap-like time travel accident or to atone for terrible sins of some future Walter, rehabilitating the name throughout time. Either way, thank you for your support, Walter. Rather listen on YouTube, search Mage the Podcast on YouTube to find our full library there. If you super like this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com or at Mage the Podcast on Twitter. We have a hop in Discord community at discord.me/magethepodcast. Mage the Podcast is also on Mastodon at dice.camp/@magethepodcast. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform you're choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to magethepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye.